Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hi, Lucy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invite. It's great to have you here. And Lucy, today we're going to talk about your area of expertise all around books, writing books, why this is useful in general for entrepreneurs, for business leaders, and also in particular for speakers and presenters. We're going to talk about the benefits of writing a book for speakers. But before we do, just a little curiosity from my side. In preparation for this conversation, I was doing some research on your background, and I don't know if it's on LinkedIn or somewhere else, I don't remember, but it looks like that you have some level of knowledge or proficiency with Italian. Is that correct?
I have a very small level of knowledge with Italian. I did actually, back in the midst of time, I did do an Italian. It was an O level at the time. So yes, I have studied Italian, but don't ask me to speak any, please.
All right, so we'll keep it in English.
Good.
Right, and the other curiosity I had, Lucy, is that my understanding is that you've written 13 books, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so how did you do that? Because for most people, writing just one book in their entire career, and I'm talking about myself as well, it's hard. Like, you've written 13 books.
Yes, a couple of them are very short, I have to say. But, well, I suppose I grew up wanting to be a writer, wanting to be an author, and writing has always been my thing. So it's not hard for me to write. It's how I express myself. I think there are two kinds of people in some ways. I think there are people who think as they write, and there are people who speak as they think as they speak. And I am definitely somebody who thinks as they write. I often don't know what I'm thinking until I see it on the screen in front of me, until I've actually put it into words. But then there are other people who find writing really tough because they think as they speak. Their words come out of their mouth. And I wish I was, in many ways, one of those, because it makes you a much more proficient and confident speaker, I think. But actually, I think being able to write things down also is also helpful when, as we've said, when you are a speaker, because that way you've got both in a sense.
Yeah,
you can.
No, you're right, and this is my experience too, Lucy. Because before I met you, because I'm following your advice, I'm trying to write my book at the moment, and I was definitely one of those who every time I wanted to communicate something, for me it was all about speaking, being on video. This is my natural way of communicating my ideas. But now that I'm following your advice, I'm part of your Bookbuilder program. The idea, and not just the idea, but just sitting down and writing what you think, I'm finding that this is extremely powerful to come up with lots of interesting ideas that then you can use, not just in the book, but also in your speaking, anytime you communicate your ideas.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that that's working for you. I think for some people, writing really, the actual act of writing is a real barrier to getting information across. And I think for those people, you should go with speaking and record, speak your book, record it, get it transcribed. I mean, it's a slightly longer way of going about it, but if you find writing a challenge, don't not write the book because of that. Find ways around it, and record and transcribe, and then edit what you speak. I think what we speak is always longer than what we write. So if you are going to, speak your book, you are likely to need to do a bigger editing job on the transcription than if you were writing it. But I think, for me, it's so important to write your book that whatever way works for you, you should definitely do it.
On that point, Lucy, you said that what you speak tends to be longer than what you write. Are there any other differences based on your experience
That's
between
really, yes.
writing and the language we use when we write and the language we use when we speak?
That's a really interesting question. And yes, I think we are also less formal when we speak. And we tend to be a bit more formal when we write. Sometimes the speaking style can be too informal to read, and you need kind of perhaps either to edit yourself or to have an editor to sort of cut that. But I think that's especially true when people have a slightly comedic style of speaking, and it's very either they tell a lot of jokes or they kind of send themselves up, and sometimes that doesn't really come across terribly well when you're reading it, and you really have to pull back and be a bit more and then people will say to me, oh, but I want my personality to be in the reading, and that's true, but there is the way you process the information in the two different formats, I think, is different. So you do need to kind of pull it back a bit and be a bit more cautious when you're actually in the written word. But then, people can be overly formal. They think that they need to be a bit academic, or they need to seem a bit clever when they're writing, and then that becomes unnatural too. So I do tell people, and I'm sure I've sort of said it to you in various times, that when you're writing a book that's going to build your business, you should be talking directly to your ideal client, your ideal prospect, and that style is the author style, the writing style that should come across. So it may not be exactly as you're speaking, but it should be addressing people on that same sort of level.
Yeah, a couple of things that you mentioned. One is, I find it interesting because from your perspective, you rightly suggest that the way we should write should be different from the way we speak. When we work with our clients at Ideas on Stage, we say exactly the same thing, but from the other perspective. When you speak as you speak, not as you write, because you're right, there are some differences. You don't want to be too of course, it depends on the context always, but you don't want to be too formal, the kind of formality that you see when writing, which works really well in that kind of communication formal context, but not necessarily when speaking. The other thing you said is that some people tend to be too formal when writing. One piece of advice I found in one of the 13 books, Bookbuilder, that you wrote with Joe Gregory, your co-founder at Rethink Press, is, and I love this piece of advice, and it's very relevant in communication in general, not just when writing a book. You say you have to be kind to your readers. For our listeners, can you tell us more about what that means?
I think that means what I mean by that is to make the reading experience, I think, as transparent as possible. So I kind of think of it as when you're writing, when you're reading, you're sort of looking at a view through a window, and the window is the words on the page. And if the window is dirty and messy and, has sort of splodges on it, it's going to be much harder to see the view. If your window is completely clean, you're just not aware of it. And that's what I mean about being kind. You don't want to do anything in your writing that disengages your reader from the content, from the story, the information that you're giving them. So you need to have an easy writing style that feels like you're talking to the reader, even though it's slightly different than if you are actually speaking to them. You also need to have good punctuation and grammar, because even though the reader's not going to necessarily go, oh, this book's very well punctuated, they are going to experience it as easy. it'll be easy for them to read it. They won't have to stop in the middle of a sentence and go, oh, hang on a sec, what's he talking about? I have to go back to the beginning because this sentence is too complicated for me to understand unless I read it twice. You just want to avoid all that kind of technical, anything that is going to divert them from your content, basically. So that's what I mean by being kind. Make it as easy as possible for them to read your book and enjoy reading it.
Yeah, no, you're right. Sometimes it's too technical. People use acronyms, or you say in the book, if there is an easy way or a hard way of saying something, let's use the easy way. And the same applies when we speak in public. If there is an easy way of explaining something or a hard way of explaining it, which is maybe too technical, too complex for a particular audience, let's go with the easy way. Now, Lucy, tell me also, I know that you think that and this is not just for speakers, but in general for entrepreneurs, for business owners, for business leaders, you think that if you are not writing a book, you are missing out on important business opportunities.
I do, absolutely. So, I mean, our strapline at Rethink Press is nothing sells you like a book. And it's not that other things can't sell you as well, like your speaking and your marketing brochures and your business card and your pitches for business. But a book is different in that it is not apparently a sales tool. It is a thing of value. It has valuable content in it. It has your experience in it. It tells some of your story. It gives case studies of what you do with your clients. So not testimonials, nothing salesy or you know, sort of pitching at people, but just saying, this is what I do. This is what we did here. Here was a person with this problem. This is what I or my business did to intervene. And here's the result. So all the time that a reader is reading that book, they're not thinking, oh, how much would that cost? Or, you know, do I need to sign up to this? No, they're just thinking, gosh, I really like this person. I trust what they're doing. Oh, I can see what they've done with other people who are in exactly the same position as me. I really think, and as you go through 30 or 40,000 words, it's not like a quick kind of, pitch to someone. They are liking you, knowing you, trusting you. And at the end of it, they're thinking, oh, I want more. And really, your book should be about information. You give them lots and lots of valuable information. You don't hold back. But what they will then come to you for, and that's if they are your ideal client, is implementation, because you can't give that through a book. You can tell them everything they need to know, and some people will go away and say, yes, I can do that myself now. That's great, thanks. But they're not your ideal client. The ones who do want to come back to you are, and they will want you to work with them and bring them what they're after, which is transformation. So the book is the first step in a 3-step process from information to implementation to transformation. And that's the kind of book that we help our authors to write. So yeah, I mean, that's the sort of overview of it. But I mean, I think an entrepreneur who doesn't have a book is just missing out on, for a start, the distribution of a book. It goes around the world. It influences people in ways that you just can't do in your daily life. No matter how much content you put out on social media, it's not the same thing as someone picking up your book or someone being given your book or somebody saying, oh, you must read that book, or just picking it up on Amazon or wherever. So, it has a way of getting your authority out there. But also there is nothing like a book. It is an iconic format. And when your name is on a book and it's a nice looking book and it's a well-edited book and it's a beautifully written book, it just says expert. That's, that is what a book does for you. It puts you head and shoulders above the rest of your market. And then there's all the marketing you can do with your book, which is mainly about giving your book away. It's not about being a bestseller or, although of course that's nice if that happens, or selling loads of copies. It's about getting your book into the hands of the people who like your prospects and potential partners and people who have platforms and people who could invite you to do speaking gigs, just getting that book into their hands. So they go, yeah, I must have this person. I must work with this person. I must partner with this person.
Yeah,
and that's what a book does.
And Lucy, so far you mainly told us why writing a book can be so powerful from a business perspective in general. What about speakers, presenters? Do you see any connections between writing a book and speaking? Are there any specific benefits, like book benefits for speakers? What do you think?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I mean, I think it starts with the writing process, because as you are writing your book, well, the way we do it, you plan and structure your book in massive detail first. So you know exactly what you do. I mean, it forces you to really look at your business and what you do. And then you write 30 to 40,000 words. And although they're getting out of your head and onto the page, they're also going into the archive of your mind. So you just have that information there at your fingertips. You become a much better speaker for having written those words, and remembering them in the right order, nicely illustrated with stories and case studies. And also then, of course, you actually have the book as content. And you can repurpose it in so many ways. If somebody says, oh, can you give me a keynote on, some aspect of what you do? Of course you do. You don't have to start from scratch. It's already written. It's part of your book. Or can you give us a few case studies? Can you talk about somebody that you worked with? Yeah, it all in your book. Or can you tell me your story about how you learned this or developed this? Yep, it's probably all in your book. So as a speaker, I just think it gives you enormous confidence to have written it all out in the right order, in the right words, and then it's just there to use as to repurpose into all sorts of speaking formats as well.
Yeah, and what if we look at this from the other perspective? So we talked about the book benefits for speakers. I think, Lucy, tell me what you think. There are also, let's say, public speaking benefits for authors. So
Oh,
once
definitely.
you are an author, then if you can leverage the two, you wrote a book and then you talk about it, you can confidently talk about it. I see as a very powerful combination.
Yes, I completely agree. And people are much more likely to want you to speak about it, your book, than they are about many other things. But also, if you are you can use your book as a sort of buffer in a way when you are talking about your business. Instead of selling yourself, you kind of sell your book. And so you're not out there boasting about yourself, if you like, on saying how wonderful you are, but you can say, I've written this book, it's got this in it, people love my book, and it's something that people want to talk about. And also, when you're writing your book, and I hope you're doing this, Andrea, people are fascinated by the writing process. It's a really good way of being able to communicate with your potential audience. Again, not by selling, but just talking about the fact that you're writing your book, that you've got this far, you've done this stage, you've done some other things, you've sent it out to beta readers, you've got feedback from whatever it is. There's a lot to talk about around the book. It's often our authors say that even when they're just talking about writing the book, people say, oh, you're writing a book, that's you really are, let me come and work with you. I mean, it's already, even before it's even out, it's working as that incredible sales tool.
Yeah. And also, Lucy, let's talk about some specific tips that you give that I mainly found on, again, Bookbuilder, because they are very effective. I found them very useful for me in this process, but also they are effective in communication in general, not just when writing a book. Now, one in particular, you say that it doesn't have to be like that, but if you can split a book into 3 parts, 3 sections, that works really well. Now, I know where that comes from, but for our listeners, why 3? Why not 13 sections? Why not 1,000 sections? Why 3?
It's interesting, isn't it? There's something about the power of the number 3 that seems to resonate in our brains, but it's also, it's to do, there's a whole load of ways you can split things up, but 3 is just works incredibly well. So you might have beginning, middle and end. I mean, that's, you know, that's absolutely fundamental and basic. But if you understand that that applies to every single thing you write, whether it's a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter, or the parts of your book, beginning, middle and end is really crucial. I mean, the other thing you can do in your book is think in 3 parts, like introduction, or theory, and then implementation, something like that. There's always 3 is just a really nice balance. I mean, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, and certainly some of our authors split their books into 2 main parts, some go for 4 main parts, but there's something to do with a kind of a balance that we feel. I don't know what neurologically why this is the case, but it really just seems to work that, you know, the power of 3 is a very good way to split up a book. And also, I'm all about kind of consistency in the writing and the structure of books. So I say that chapters should be around the same length, and the parts of the book should be around the same length. However, you can balance things very easily with 3. So if you have a shorter opening part, then a longer middle part and a shorter end part, then that kind of also balances well. You don't have to have them all the same length. Well, if you've got 4 parts or 2 parts, you can't get that same sort of balance. So I mean, it's an odd thing, and I don't really know the answer to your question. I just know that 3 is a really good way of breaking things into digestible parts.
Yeah, it is. 3 is the most important, persuasive, memorable number in communication. It works in public speaking as well. The rule of 3 is one of the simplest but most powerful principles in communication that we can apply all the time in many different contexts. Like in a presentation, for example, it could be as simple as, which is very, very similar to a book. You could have the structure of your presentation could be as simple as a quick introduction where you try and capture the audience's attention. Then you've got the main body of your presentation, which could be, for example, it doesn't have to, but it could be 3 key messages. 3 key messages, not 7, not 1,000, and then a powerful conclusion, making it very clear to your audience what was your point, why they should care about it, what do you want them to do next. And the same can be applied in a book as well. Now, Lucy, another piece of advice you give, and you mentioned it already because you mentioned case studies already a couple of times in this conversation. You suggest that when writing a book, instead of just including information, let's say information, the ideas that you want to get across, this is very important, but you should combine the information with some case studies, let's say storytelling in general. So you've got this combination of information and storytelling with examples, case studies. Again, can you tell us more about that? Why do you think that combination works well?
I think it works well because it breaks up the reading experience for the reader. I mean, I'm sure we all know that, you know, when we try and take on board loads of information at length, we kind of get overloaded and we have to stop. But if we break it up, if we break that factual information up with stories, then we get a break, and it's kind of more like a bit of entertainment thrown in, but also it's a really good way of getting a different kind of information across to people. And I'm sure you know, obviously, you know that telling stories is a brilliant thing to do when you're speaking. It really engages people. So I think in a book there should be 2 kinds of stories that definitely are there. There might be more, but one is your own story, which I think is really important to make, you know, to get that like and trust part, that you actually tell people. And it's not about boasting and going out there and saying, you know, I did this brilliantly, I'm so successful, I am fantastic. It's more about being vulnerable and authentic and telling people, this was my problem. It's sort of almost a case study as well. I have a problem. And again, this is a 3-part thing. The story should be short shorten in 3 parts: the problem, the issue, the intervention, and then the outcome. And you can do that with your own story. So I wouldn't say, I don't tell people to put in a whole long chapter about their own life story, but to break it up and use it as illustration to the factual stuff. So your own story could be, if you learned something particular, if you're giving people a tip. I mean, for instance, I will always say, plan and structure first before you start writing. And I have a story about how I didn't do this once, and it was a complete disaster. And then I learned how to plan and structure, and my book was shortlisted in an awards. So, that sort of illustration story is really useful. And I think that works very well in speaking, doesn't it, as well as in a book. And then again, the other sort is not your story, but the story of how you've worked with someone else. So ideally, you will have client stories that you can turn into case studies. And again, it's about, this person had a problem, I solved it in this way, or this was my intervention, and this is what the result was. And that's just just a really good way of getting people to in a short form way to say, oh, I see what you do, I understand. And that our brain is kind of designed to take information in and to remember stories, because when you tell a story, the listener or the reader creates a picture in their mind. And that's what you need to do. You don't want to just say, a managing director I worked with had a problem. You want to say, John was a managing director who was in this company, and he, had this problem with whatever. But just, give that sort of detail that makes people feel it's real, and they create the pictures, the little film in their mind of the story, and then they'll remember it. Yeah. And that's what will bring them back to you.
They remember it. You bring your message to life by doing that. And everything you said, Lucy, is 100% relevant to speaking in public, giving presentations. 100% relevant. So I don't have to add anything. There was one other, among many others, but one in particular piece of advice that I've got here, which is also very much connected to what we do when we work with our clients. You suggest that once you've written your first draft for the book, then you say, take a break, have maybe 1 or 2 days before you go back to it. And it's something that we do as well with our clients in a different context. Tell us more from your perspective. Why do you give that suggestion? You write the first draft of the book, and then rather than starting again, reviewing things, editing, take 1 or 2 days off from the book, and then you start again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my experience tells me that it's much better when you write your first draft to just go for it. Do not start, don't edit, don't go away and research stuff. Leave yourself notes, but it's very difficult when you're someone like me who, whatever I write, even if it's an email, I'll kind of edit it about 6 times before I send it off. But actually, when you're writing your first draft, that is the biggest chunk of work you will do in your book, and you need to just get through it as quickly as possible. Ernest Hemingway said, and excuse my language, it's not my language, it's his language, but he said, all first drafts are shit. And that is the gold standard. You don't want a brilliant first draft, because that means you've taken too much time fiddling around with it. Just get what's in your head onto the page, onto the screen, and out of it. And then, because you become so immersed in what you write, and you sit there and you kind of come back to your computer or your laptop, and it's like you go into another world. Your book is a kind of world you enter, and it's very symbiotic. So when you want to edit it, you need to come out of that world, and you need to become the reader and not the writer anymore. So that's why I always say, take a break when you finish that first draft, go away from it, don't think of it, don't open it, and then print it out and edit it on paper. I know that's not eco-friendly, and it seems very old school, but actually it then becomes a different thing. It's not that world on your screen. It is almost a book-shaped artifact with, paper and you make your notes in pen on that thing, and that turns you into a reader. And so you can get much more perspective by taking that break and putting it in a different format. Then you can get perspective, and then you can go back and do your editing based on the notes that you've made in your hard copy. So that's why. A
couple of things you mentioned, which are again very much connected to communication, presenting, public speaking. One is that you said, for example, even if it's not very eco-friendly, but when you have it on paper, then it tends to work better rather than just keeping working on a Word document, for example. The same applies to if you really want to be creative when preparing a presentation, rather than just opening up PowerPoint or any other presentation tool, it's much better to go analog. John Cleese said, "We don't know where we get our ideas from, but what we do know is that we don't get them from our laptops." So that's something that I find very much connected to what we do as well. And the other thing is that taking a break once you've done a certain piece of work, same thing. Now, for example, Lucy, when we work with our clients, not the first one, but one of the very first things we do in preparation for a talk, for a presentation, together we do a brainstorming session to try and come up with lots of interesting ideas that maybe then we can include in the content of the presentation. Once we've done that brainstorming, what we say is, rather than just on the same day going back to it, trying to refine it and tweak it, edit it, make it better, wait 1 or 2 days and then go back to it. And you're right, what happens, I don't know why, but what happens is that once you get back to it, after 1 or 2 days, then you see connections that you didn't see before. You see patterns, you can see that you can group ideas together and you couldn't see those groups before. You come up with maybe a better story, a better case study, a better idea, a better analogy, and you couldn't think about it before. So again, very much connected. And also, Lucy, you've got a model that you call, I think, the 3 Ps, which is really useful, I think, also in communication. It's a model for you to be able to position your book for maximum impact. Can you take us through the model?
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, it's the first step that we always take our authors through before they start even planning their book, is to position your book to your market, to make sure it's going to be the right book for your business, that it's totally aligned with what you do now. So the 3 Ps are person, pain, and promise. And the person is your ideal client. And, you really need to unpick who the ideal person that you really want to work with, can work with you, has enough money to work with you, who that is. And for some people, they think that it's better to be quite broad and include as many people in their marketing as possible, but actually that's usually wrong. And in fact, everybody has a very specific niche, and sometimes when people are working on this for their book, they will suddenly realize that actually their niche is tighter and more specific, but they can talk very directly to those people because they know them well. And so we suggest that people actually choose one person, whether it's somebody that they've already worked with who was an ideal client, or somebody they know that they'd love to work with who would be an ideal prospect, or just somebody you create as an avatar. And then you can talk directly to them. And the second thing you need to know about them is their pain. Now, all your clients, whoever they are, whatever your business is, will have different kinds of problems and questions that they want you to solve for them. But overall, all of them will have the same kind of pain that you can summarize in, a single sentence. And again, you should be able to summarize your client base, your ideal client in a single sentence, your person. So again, you need to get that very clear, that the pain they are in when they come looking for you, either to read your book or hear you speak or work with you, is something that you need to be absolutely clear on. And then the third thing, of course, is your promise. It's what gets them from that pain to the place they want to be. And that is what you do in your business. That is what you promise them, but that is also what you need to do in your book. So you need to be really clear what you are offering people when they open your book and they see, that this book is for someone like them. What are you promising them by the time they've finished reading it and they come out the other end? And the other interesting thing is that we've discovered that those 3 P's, person, pain, and promise, need to be very evident in the title and subtitle, so that anybody who picks it up is immediately able to see this is a book for me, or the people who you're aiming at. So those are the 3 P's. And when people have got that straight, people often come to us and say, don't know what kind of book I might write. I mean, I could do it this way, or I could do it that way, or I could talk about this or that. Once you've got the 3 P's clear, you know exactly what your book's about. There's absolutely no question that this is the book that you need to write now, the book that's going to build your business. Yeah. So that is
again, Lucy, and I'm making these comments to make our listeners today understand why everything you're saying is so relevant to them as speakers, presenters. You say that this is the first thing you do, like the 3 P's, and the first P is person. Now, in a presentation, exactly the same thing. Again, rather than starting the process of developing a presentation by opening up PowerPoint and putting together some slides, or thinking about what you want to communicate, the very first thing should be the audience. You say person, I say audience, same thing. Who is your audience? What are their needs? What's the context? This is the only way for all of us to be able to create something, which could be a book, it could be a talk, which is relevant to that particular audience, to their needs and the context. So again, another great connection there. And are there any, so you gave us some tips already, but from a writing perspective, so for somebody who wants to be able to write better, maybe somebody who's in the process of writing a book, any tips, any writing tips that we should consider? Anything that comes to, I know that maybe it's a general question, you can think of thousands of tips. Anything in particular that comes to mind?
Well, I think that, we've just touched on one of them, and it is just talk to that person. Don't worry about all the other people who you might think might read your book. Don't go for the sort of, I'm talking to all you lovely people out there. That's not the approach you want to take with your book. You want to say, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, Andrea, in my book. My book is for you. So I'm speaking to you personally. And then, everybody who reads it will think you are that person, but especially the people who actually are the people you want to talk to. So just talk to one person when you're writing. Don't feel like, you need to speak to the world. I think the, just some other sort of small tips are, don't second guess your reader. I mean, I really, this is kind of where we get into the editing phase, perhaps more. But I mean, our editors always take out things like, oh, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking so don't do that. Don't say I know what you're thinking, because if you're a reader who's not thinking that, it's incredibly annoying. So, don't kind of assume that you know what your reader's thinking. And don't also, when you're writing your book, you'll remember that you're writing for authority. And, possibly you say this to people about speaking as well. Cut out those things like, well, I think, and I believe, and anything that kind of undermines what you are giving them as actual, solid information, gospel truth. You are the expert, so you are telling them. You don't need to undermine yourself by suggesting that, well, it's just something that you think and other people might think something else. Don't even put that thought in their minds. Just, be absolutely clear that what you are saying is what you know, it's your expertise. And, then it's just, up to them to believe it or not if they don't want to. But they will feel, if you're confident about what you're saying, and I'm sure the way that you're saying it, people will feel safe with you. They'll feel confident with you. So, you need to give them that security when you're both writing and speaking, I would say.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, and there are many other examples, is weak language, that there are more effective ways of getting our ideas across. A couple of very practical tips I found, again, in Bookbuilder. One is the process of creating an actual writing schedule and stick to it. And there is another one, but can you tell us more about this process of creating a writing schedule and sticking to it?
Yes, absolutely. It's I call it, creating your writing habit. And I mean, I think we all know how easily we fall into bad habits. You only have to do the same thing. I mean, like if, you have your coffee at 11 o'clock and, one day there's a nice bar of chocolate there. And you think, oh, I'll have it today. And then the next day you say, oh, that was nice. I'll have a bar of chocolate. And then, suddenly you're in the habit of eating chocolate with your 11 o'clock coffee or whatever it is. And it seems like you have to do it. So you can use that for your own good. So it's hard to get into, writing a big piece of work like a book. But if you break it down into manageable chunks and you do, for instance, an hour a day, and if you do it at the same time every day in the same place, and you do things like you use the same props, so you use the same mug, cup of tea. If you listen to music when you're writing, you use the same soundtrack. Wherever it is, your brain then goes into habit mode, and as soon as all those things come together, it says, right, writing time. We've done this 3 times now. I know that it's time to write, and suddenly it becomes natural. It becomes just what you do at that time of day. And I mean, the most effective writing habit for the biggest number of people is to get up an hour early and write an hour a day if you can. And that seems to work incredibly well to get you through the first draft. But of course, if you're not an early morning person, or that doesn't work for you, that's fine. Everybody's writing habit is what works for them. So if you're a night owl rather than an early rising lark, then maybe doing it last thing at night. But regularity, consistency is what really works to get you through that first draft, which, as I say, is the hardest part of the book.
Yeah, I found another connection from what you said, a connection to the main topic of this podcast, communication, public speaking, presentations, which is, in a way, you mentioned the idea of creating a habit, and it's not exactly the same thing, but it's connected. Like, for example, what I suggest that speakers do before a presentation, even myself, I always have a kind of ritual. So something that you do, the same thing, exactly the same sequence, the same thing before. It could be just 1 minute. I have a 1 minute warm-up sequence just before the presentation. With our clients, we do the same. And so the idea of having, for example, the same mug or the same environment creates that kind of ritual or habit that's very effective. Lucy, another thing which I found I'm finding, because I'm still writing it, I'm finding extremely useful, is the idea of deciding the topic of the next writing session the day before. And it's great, because then every morning, so I'm doing it every morning, that's my writing schedule, then rather than wasting, even if it's just a few minutes, or sometimes it could be like 10 minutes, half an hour, thinking about what to do, what should I write about, you've done it the day before. And so, without me continuing, tell us more about why this is useful.
Well, I think there are 2 parts to this. The first is that you need to plan in detail. So you will have done with us the structuring of your book. And that's not just, jotting down a few chapter headings and thinking, oh, I'll fill those in when I get to them. It's actually putting in step by step everything that goes in a chapter, including your own anecdotes and case studies, and where you're going to quote from other people, but also, which elements of fact and your knowledge go into each chapter, and where you're going to divide your book into its 3 parts. So when you've done that, you then have a really, really detailed contents page. And you know pretty much how long each of those little bits is going to be. So when you've done that, you don't even necessarily have to write in chronological order. You never need to ask yourself what comes next. What you can do is simply pick a topic, as you say, the night before, and say, I'll write on that tomorrow. And it can come from anywhere in the book, because you've done your structure, so you know exactly where everything is going to fit back in. And then, yes, I mean, the reason I think it works so well to choose your topic the night before, the day before, is because you're giving your brain processing time. And it's a bit like that what you were saying, with the workshopping ideas and then giving yourself a couple of days and coming back to them. What you're doing is allowing your subconscious to process and make connections and think about how you might put that content together. And you don't have to do anything. That's the great thing. It gives you a huge amount of time. You're working on your book or your talk, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. And in fact, it's better not to consciously think about it, because your subconscious doesn't work when you're holding that information in your consciousness, however you want to call it. You have to let it go and let the processing happen kind of behind closed doors in your head. And then you'll come down, the next day and start writing, and your brain will go bing, 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 bing. Yep, those are the connections. Here's what we should say. And it's just amazing what you can do without having to work on it. Yep. So
yeah, no, so true. For example, what I'm doing this, Lucy, is I even get to the point where not only do I choose in my head, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. I take a piece of paper, I write it down, the title, that's the topic, and then I have it ready, as you said, to create a habit on the desk. I wake up in the morning and everything is ready. So I get there and this is the title, this is the topic, and you're right, this is what's happening. So thanks for that piece of advice, very useful. And Lucy, as we get closer to our conversation, I also wanted to touch a little bit on something I know you do, which is very important. I know that as part of the work you do, you do a lot of work supporting women in books and in business in general. And again, that's very important. I would love for you to tell us more about your work from that perspective, supporting women.
Oh, thank you. Well, yes, I started the Business Book Awards 5 years ago, and we put together a great judging panel with 10 women and 10 men. And, we thought that everything was, very kind of egalitarianly, all the categories and all that sort of thing. The criteria were very equal. And we went through this process of shortlisting and then judging the 150 entries we got the first year. And when we got to the end of the process and we saw who had won the awards, every single one of them was a white man. Literally every single winner of the category awards, Business Book of the Year, they were all white men. And nothing against white men, but it didn't seem to be a very fair outcome. So I thought, well, what's going on here? And I did a lot of research about how women felt about writing their books and publishing their books. And it turned out that actually there is a lot of, unfortunately, still discrimination, both in business and in publishing, about, people kind of feel that men are more authoritative, that they have more to say. And women are also much less confident about putting their ideas out into the world than men are. They worry a lot more about criticism and their credibility, and they really feel very vulnerable when they're getting their books published. So I thought, well, I will set up a Facebook group initially and do some mentoring of women-only groups where they can feel they can share their experience and make a difference. And I wrote a book called A Book of One's Own, which is about why fewer women seem to write business books and get them published, why they should, and how they can do it. And then I sort of mentored various groups of women through the writing process. And I was surprised to find how much more these women worried about putting their books out, got imposter syndrome, felt insecure about what they were writing, and really, as I say, worried a lot about the fact that they thought they'd be criticized. And I'm sure men feel this, to some extent too, but it really does seem to be more of a problem for women. so working in groups of just women together, they felt kind of confident that they could share, and they supported each other, and it was it worked very well. And in fact, by using the Business Book Awards as a platform for greater diversity and equality and inclusion, we've actually we've just had the 5th Business Book Awards. And amazingly, we had double the number of books entered in the first. We had 300 entries this year, and they were pretty much equal numbers of books from men and women. And when I counted up the shortlist, I was absolutely amazed. We shortlisted books by 116 authors. Some of them were co-authored, so they were mixed. But when I counted up the number of authors, I found we had shortlisted exactly 58 men authors and 58 women authors. So I thought, okay, it's taken 5 years, but we have got to a kind of equality there that I was really delighted to find. And then, of course, we had, I think actually we had more women winners this year than last year. So I think sometimes it just takes shining a light on an issue to make people realise that, there is an issue. Unconscious bias is a thing. We all do it. It's not men against women. We all just, take certain attitudes, and until we kind of look at them and think, oh, no, that's not quite right, we often don't do anything about it. So I'm pleased to say that I do think, and I'm not saying, it's just what I've done, but I do think that the Business Book Awards has been a good platform for talking about diversity of all kinds, in fact, in business writing. And it's great to see all sorts of business experts, entrepreneurs writing their books now and feeling confident to be able to do it.
Amazing. That's fantastic. And again, congratulations for creating their platform. And Lucy, of course, we've been talking about books. Now, I love books. Not only am I writing a book, I read books all the time. So do you have any suggestions for us? I would say beyond your own resources, your own books, and for our listeners, again, I highly recommend Bookbuilder, or like all the other books that Lucy had, the other 12 books that Lucy has written. But if you think about what we talked about today, writing a book, writing in general, communication, public speaking, like all the areas that we've touched, by any chance, do you have one book recommendation, anything at all that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I will do. I mean, I won't say it's the one, because I read so many and publish so many great books. But I think just in terms of kind of reinforcing some of the things we've said today, one of our authors who has recently published her book and also came on the Bookbuilder program, and you probably know her, Andrea, Susan Payton, has written a fabulous book called The Business of Stories.
Yep.
And I think that is a great book to read before you start writing your book, or when you're creating your speaking, your talks as well. That the way to tell a good story, the way to use a story in a book, in a talk, to sell yourself, to sell your business. I think she's done that beautifully. So I'm among all, the many books that we publish, and we publish about 70 books a year. So it's a bit unfair of me to single out one, because they're all brilliant. But I think in terms of what we've talked about today, I would say read Susan's book called The Business of Stories.
Yeah, Susan is great. In fact, I had a call with her recently to talk about my book and her experience writing her book with you. And because I know that she's very strong from a storytelling perspective. So there were some connections as well between what we do. Susan Payton, The Business of Stories. That's great recommendation. And Lucy, before we close, if anybody wants to connect with you, with Rethink, where do they find you? What should they do?
Well, I'm on all sort of social media. I've got one of those names that's really hard to spell, but it means there's only me out there. There's no other Lucy McCarraher out there. So I'm definitely connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Our website is www.rethinkpress.com. So do come and have a look there, and you can get in touch with us through that, or just drop an email to info@rethinkpress.com, and we'll have a chat. And it would be lovely to talk to anybody who's interested in writing or publishing or both their book.
Perfect. And Lucy, this is the last question, and I always like to end with this one. And sometimes it leads to something very interesting. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's totally fine. It's okay. Like no pressure at all. But if you think about everything we talked about many things: writing, books, why it's important for business in general, and for speakers. We talked about the connection between writing a book and communication, public speaking, many other things. Women, what's the most important thing? If there is one thing you would like our listeners today to remember and to take away, what is it?
Oh, that is a massive question, Andrea. I think to remember that a book is an iconic format, and that whether you're reading a book or writing a book, or you've got your book out there and published, it is something incredibly special. There is a power in a book that I think is very hard to find in any other medium, and it's partly to do with the length of it. It's partly to do with structure, and that might be another thing I could have said, that I think structure is key to both writing books and creating talks. But just that when you've written your book, you've done something really incredible. It's a really special thing to have done, and nobody else could have written your book. It is a kind of unique signature of yours, and it's your legacy. So whatever reasons you have for writing your book, and certainly being able to use it as a tool to build your business is key. But also there's so much more that goes around it, that it is a symbol of you and all you do. And it is something you leave in the world that will be there for a very long time.
Great. This is a perfect way to close our conversation. Again, Lucy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your insights, your knowledge. And I'm sure that we'll be in touch, because I'm part of your Bookbuilder program, so we'll be in touch. And thanks again, all the very best, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com, or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.